Stanescu?
Almost. Tănăsescu.
Tănăsescu, sorry. And I will just call you Chris from now on.
Yes, please
There's
do.
not a lot of advantages sometimes about the Anglo-Saxon system, but it's nice that we all call ourselves with first names at least. So yes. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Chris, and also the kind word and the invitation. It's a bit of a shame that I can't be with you there, wherever there is nowadays, but I'm sure we will find in the future opportunities to get together in one way or the other and drink a beer or two or three, right? So, so I was trying to give a talk on the relevance of the humanities for AI. I'm going to quickly summarize this in about 5 minutes so that you all have a little reminder of what you have watched. Now, I should maybe apologize at the beginning for this kind of attempt, because it is already, of course, kind of an ambivalent thing to do, to ask for the relevance of humanities, considering all the economic backdrops and these kind of things. But for me, it's, of course, still that I'm asked this question from time to time. So when I thought I'd just try and give you the answers that I'm trying to find. And I first go a little bit through the history of this relationship between AI and humanities, with the knowledge that, of course, this history is much longer than many people think. You know, it's a history that goes back in a way to the invention of AI around logic. I am currently at the University of Amsterdam in the Institute of Language, Logic and Computation that has played a big role in this particular approach. And then there are, of course, also fields in the humanities, such as computational linguistics. I think I mentioned that one, which have a strong influence on the core development of AI technologies. What I, however, wanted to really look at is more like the general humanities practice and this relationship to AI. And I think I pick up 2 points. The first one is a methodological one, and the second one is an ethical one. The first one, the methodological one, is about distant reading. Now, I think I said that in the talk too. I am not particularly keen on that title, but it is what it is, so to say. We are now having these kind of discussions of macro, micro, meso, and I heard of meso too recently, reading styles. But what is behind it is that we have to realize that we are now not alone anymore in this world with intelligence analysis in one way or the other, and there are machines. So it might make sense to compare our own understanding about text, but also other things, with whatever machines might think about that. Once that all said, the question is, how can we do that in a way that is relevant for the humanities? And I present a series of fairly unconnected projects, I think, in the talk that try to do that in the sense that they, for instance, surface histories that would be otherwise forgotten. So, for instance, oral testimonies, that they look at changes in history, not just long trends, and so on. And I also, and that's maybe an interesting discussion point, I also very keen to currently discuss how we can use this technologies such as classifications or methodologies such as classification to actually analyze not just certainty, so classify things into drawers, but also uncertainty. I think there's actually a lot of uncertainty possibilities there. And then also what it would mean to look not just how computers successfully reason about our material, but also how they fail. So that's, I think, the 2 points that I find very interesting at the moment. And then the second area is, of course, ethics. Now, in Europe, at least, if you work in the humanities and AI, you can't escape the ethics corner. So I'm sure that's the same in Belgium. The challenge there is, of course, that you are often put into this position where you are, at the end of the process, you're just signing off whatever technology people actually did, a kind of ethical advisory board. But of course, this is not humanities research, right, on ethics. And I have 2 ideas currently that I'm trying to develop. The first one is this kind of idea that's fairly new for me, that I learned in Amsterdam. This is, I call it in a way, empirical philosophy. So we look at how decisions of good and bad are made, in this current system, not just by humans, but also by machines, and the philosophical background of them, the conditions of them. And the second one is something that I've been doing for quite a while, mainly with colleagues from my old university, King's College, where we look at how we can democratize all these technologies. So it's not just the data scientists who benefit from this, the AI engineers, but actually everyone becomes a data citizen. And I think that's also very much at the heart, of course, of the digital humanities agenda, to broaden that knowledge. And then finally, to say, just also, because I read some with interest some of the discussions over the summer in the US around more activist humanities. What can we actually do around taking all this critical knowledge from computer science, information science, and actually try and broaden that spectrum and analyze and use it in our own reasoning and the critique of society. And these were the 3 points I made in the talk. And I'm now looking very much forward to comments, questions, answers, and whatever else.
Thank you so much, Tobias. Yes, before we get there, I should have started with reading your bio, your impressive bio. So while people percolate their questions or comments, I'll do that. Tobias Blanke is University Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Humanities at the University of Amsterdam. His academic background is in moral philosophy and computer science. Tobias' principal research interests lie in the development and research of artificial intelligence and big data devices, as well as infrastructures for research, particularly in the human sciences. Recently, he has also extensively published on ethical questions of AI, like predictive policing or algorithmic otherings, as well as critical digital practices and the engagement with digital platforms. Tobias has authored 3 books, over 80 journal articles, conference papers, and book chapters spanning traditional philosophy, computer science, and digital studies. He has been an investigator on high-quality research grants well in excess of over 30 million euros, including the coordination of major European networks. Tobias' monographs include most recently Digital Asset Ecosystems, Rethinking Crowds and Clouds, really cool title, by the way, which offers a new perspective on the collaboration between humans and computers in global digital workflows. He is currently writing a book on the socio-economic position of AI called Algorithmic Reason, The Governance of Self and Other. And I think towards the end of the recorded talk, there's also a slide, right? The table of contents of this forthcoming book, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it is in the typical COVID review poll. I don't know how it is for you currently, but I'm waiting now for everything. It's understandable. People have other worries currently, right?
Yeah. Well, speaking of North American participants, Joanna Drucker joined us. My God, Joanna, it's 3 a.m., right, in California?
No, it's 5 a.m.
5 a.m. Oh, okay. Oh, wow, that's...
Okay, I get up at 4:30.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. That's, yeah. Well, I don't know if you got a chance to see, but Tobias referenced your work in his talk.
I haven't seen the talk. I didn't realize. I will look at it after.
Okay, yeah. It's still there on my website. And then we exchanged a couple of messages yesterday, and he was like, well, check out the other references I've made to John. And I said, where? I did a quick search through his recent publications. And I was like, I was like, if this is a scavenger hunt thing, you got
an AI bot, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was like, you got to give him more clues. And he was like, no, this is in the forthcoming book. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was an easy answer then, right?
Right. Can't find it. There's now a citation bot that helps you figure out where you want to position yourself in your social networks and optimize your profile.
See, that's useful artificial intelligence.
Okay, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get serious. There's a Q&A session going on here. Alors, est-ce que nous avons des questions, des commentaires? Yes. Yes. Well, speaking of ethics, before I get the first question, Sally, were you going to say something? Oh, sorry. Yes, please go on. You got to unmute your mic. Sally, you got to unmute your mic.
Sorry, it's coming. So, sorry, I wondered if I could shall I maybe kick off there? Thanks very much for your presentation. It was lovely to see some research work. We've worked a lot together, but see some of the research you've been doing as well. So this was great. You mentioned in your talk, Tobias, about algorithmic criticism. And I absolutely believe in the importance of this. But I wondered about if we could move towards algorithmic literacy. What would that mean? How could we teach it in digital humanities in programs? And what skills might it entail? So nice, easy one to start with.
I'm not sure to say. So I've been teaching algorithmic literacy for about 10 years now, and I should say that it is actually much easier nowadays than it was about 10 years ago, because that is actually not the work of the humanities, but there's much better kind of from computer science, much better ways of teaching programming. So if you want to call it like this. So if you could look at this from a deeper level, and I can also say that in the practice, particularly if you make that relevant to humanities people, so you don't do the usual introduction to poker games or something, but you actually analyze whatever historical documents, then actually students are willing to learn this very quickly with these kind of new technologies. And I have a whole different opinion about this to say there's also a new project funded DIMPA with Daria, to say, so a Teach platform that will release these things. That is one side. And then the other question is, of course, how much do we need to know about? So the GDPR, the famous kind of European last line of defense against algorithmic overlords, it contains this kind of a line, which is, I think, everyone needs to be able to understand the logic of the reasoning they're exposed to. Unfortunately, the GDPR is not particular. I think that's in one of the paragraphs. Unfortunately, the GDPR is not very specific in how that is supposed to be done. Outside of the kind of core humanities curriculum. We have very good experience with basically sitting people together in so-called hackathons, workshops where people of different skill sets can analyze the computational problem together. That's again a whole different talk, to say, but so I think that can work very well so that everyone more or less understands what kind of algorithmic reasoning they're exposed to. Yeah. So, but I think it's also a research problem for all of us, to say. So I think it's not solved by no means.
Very interesting. And I just wondered, because humanists are very interested in narratives and that sort of thing, whether notebooks and the way you can sort of explore code as a narrative may be a way, but I'll leave.
Yeah, no, that's exactly that. I didn't want to discuss now notebooks, but that's of course exactly it. So the kind of notebooks are combinations of documents and executable code. And the nice thing about the executable code is then you can make it also arbitrarily more difficult or less difficult, so to say. So no, they are wonderful, to say. They're also, I mean, you know, they're also a great answer to all these questions that you and I tried to solve about 10 years ago to produce tools that everyone can use. No? So I think they actually have made this kind of attempt by digital humanities to make this kind of super tools. I'm not sure how they would look like, and then also sustain them. I think that often the biggest problem, actually a bit redundant, because I think they work very well on a kind of data analysis level, at least, you know, by themselves.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Okay. Yes. Is somebody trying to tell us something? Well, speaking of ethics, yes. I mean, here we at UCLouvain we actually have an option in digital cultures and ethics, and some of the participants today are master degree students in a course I teach in enjeux culturels et éthique du numérique. The title in English is yeah, okay. No, but I have no doubt. But what I was going to say is, like, it's an English-friendly course, and we had to come up with a catchy translation into English, and that was the digital turn in cultures and ethics. So there's strong interest. Even my position is chair in digital cultures and ethics. So there's strong interest in the ethical side of the digital and of AI and all that.
So can I then ask you, how do you then avoid, so I mean, you must know that, so with the GDPR again, with the kind of European third way, I don't know whether you heard about this, the kind of Europe does ethical AI, North America does whatever, personal data, and the Chinese do surveillance. How do you avoid, to say, being stuck in that corner, to say, if you are supposed to do ethics? I would be curious to know how you do it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's why, I mean, me and my students, we were like really thrilled to see that, in your case, in this talk, you started with this, like, the contribution of humanities and digital humanities to AI, resides in one, distance reading, and we can talk about this, and two, ethics. And everybody were like, oh, yes. So it's like, and then all the details that you provided, and all the references, including your own work, that was really really useful for me as a teacher, right? And providing more and really cutting edge contributions to the topic.
Very kind.
Yeah, no, thank you for this. And we are also excited to see that, while speaking of the criticism that humanities can contribute to artificial intelligence, the way in which you personally conduct that is also very creative, and is always like really a really encouraging thing to see, that there is this creative side to things that are people sometimes expect to be like very analytical, very sometimes maybe even dry, and particularly the ways in which you deal with established knowledge. So your way of doing critical assessment of information and of data, and the way you use predictive analytics to challenge or deconstruct certainties and destabilize, established knowledge. And also you use the term creative per se in your work on AI, and at a certain point you speak of creative new narratives, creating new narratives and different voices for the critical understanding of history, right? So it was to a certain extent exhilarating, right, to talk in class about creative approaches to history that are actually unearthing, right, voices from the past in a creative way, and titles like predicting the past and all that. So if there is anything you'd like to say about that, I'm sure we'll continue to be thrilled to hear more. Yes.
So actually, I think there's now. So I come back maybe first to the first bit to say why I think the humanities contributes to the ethical debate.
Yes,
and
please.
I now to say, now that we have also American listeners, it's also a very European debate, right? So there's a lot on in the sense that there's a certain setup here with the European Union around ethical AI, and then you have the I think I forgot now the name, the European Union Advisory Board on Ethics and AI or something like this, who came up with guidelines, and they're all nice, they're fine. But I think they don't really solve the issue that, in a way, also Sally's question addresses, which is actually, you have these guidelines, and what do you now do with them, and how do we translate them actually into everyday practices? And I think that's exactly where the humanities have a lot of experiences, because we've been trying this to translate this kind of digital world into, people who are otherwise engaged with this for a long, long time, to say. And I think we've been doing this in a very creative way, as you said. There's also not just digital humanities, but now, of course, all kinds of like digital media, digital sociology. So new ways of basically involving people in the digital, so that it's not just some experts who are doing this, but also everyone. Yeah, simply because, and I'm a firm believer that that's the only way forward, because I'm not the biggest fan of regulations in general. So, and I think that if we want to make a society where we can live together with AI, in one way or the other, whatever that means, then we need to basically put in some work in there. And I think the humanities are perfectly positioned for that. At least the kind of new humanities, So I mean, there's also been humanities computing and these kind of things is a different matter than together. But then the other question you asked, it's not just me, I think, to say. So I read this paper by Song, which I think also cited with great interest. It's very enthusiastic, which basically uses, and I know it's been a while since I read it, but I think it uses basically classification technology to understand the problems behind the classification of black and white authors in the American literature. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah.
And they make an extremely powerful argument why they find that interesting.
Yes.
Maybe more powerful than me because they, of course, I'm deep in my heart a computer person, but they come actually from literary studies and want to make a critique. And it's very nice and wonderful how they describe this. So I use this now paper in all my teaching. And that is because, of course, we think of computers as decision-making, or let's say artificial intelligence as a decision-making tool where you have an input space, whatever, all American novel, and you come out with an output that is a classification, black, white author, or different types of authors, and that's it. But of course, for the computer internally, that calculation doesn't look like that at all. What the computer does is the computer calculates several probabilities that we then make with another interesting process called thresholding that we then make into decisions, right? So, or we together with the computers. And we just simply learned a lot by not doing this thresholding, right? So by not saying we translate the probability of 0.7 into 0 and the probability of 0.8 into 1, but actually look at the kind of differences in these kind of relationships. And that actually then shows you exactly what I think is interesting, the fluency of the boundaries between these things, right? So, and where the problems are. So I think a new paper, for instance, we look at, I think I mentioned that too, we look at an international organization called the International Panel on Climate Change.
Right? Yes, you mentioned that. Yes, you did.
So, and there's a big challenge. We're trying to understand basically how people become candidates for the board. The board is the central organization. And the big challenge in that approach is that if you use computers to do this, then there will always, so it's called in computer science called the accuracy paradox. So if you have whatever 2,000 people and you want to look for 20 people in that and classify that, then the computer can always classify the negative group and you will get a very high accuracy because only 20 people are falling out of this. So you have a big challenge there in doing this on the first side. And then actually you really see in that paper, you then see, so for instance, political alliances, certain to say that there's also financial interests that of course play a role. So you see actually once you look at below the kind of purely classification and you look at the actual calculations that the computer is doing, then you see actually this kind of fluencies in these decisions and also where the political alliances. And I think they're super exciting if you ask me. So yeah, and so I'm not going to keep talking as long as nobody else is going to say something. That's great because it's fine and can talk. The other thing is that I think that has a whole set of interesting questions when the computer actually miscalculates. So if that's my other point that also someone makes it in his paper, that the interesting question is not just to say for computer scientists. The aim is, I now generalize, is of course to make a system that's as accurately predicting stuff as possible. And while we also want to do this in a way because we want to get a fairly stable model, an interesting model, I think it's almost as exciting for us what actually failures are done. So where does this computer struggle to get their own reasoning in line with our own understanding? Yeah, so which is trying to match, and then you see, for instance, that a certain candidate from a certain country was left out. So the person has exactly the same background, let's say, as from another country. And these kind of reasonings you can then do. And that's where really, I think, critical reasoning can work with this kind of process, And yeah, that's basically what I'm trying to do.
Right. Well, we found that really impressive, and the results, yeah. And even like considering doing this, like looking for gender into like archives from the 1600s, right? And proving that computational methods could work so much better than established methods of looking into that, right? That was. And the conclusions of similarities in discourse between Trump and Obama, that was, yeah. And also the differences between Trump and Eisenhower.
Yeah, no. And unfortunately, unfortunately, I would say, fortunately, he's not president anymore, so this paper will be outdated soon. But you're right to say that. But the main challenge there is a lot of work, and that's where I think the humanities needs to be a bit careful. There's a lot of work, of course, if you look into kind of computational analysis that looks at large trends, right? So you would say, the culturonomics argument, so which is basically you have now the Google Books corpus, and then you look at trends over time and whatever. You find out that during the First World War, surprise, people talk a lot about war, right? But I'm not so sure that's actually what in the critical humanities you are so particularly interested in. I think you are actually interested in the change, and change is actually much more difficult to represent with computers than continuancies, right?
Right.
That is what to say that paper, and I was quite thrilled to find Eisenhower. Now it makes all sense, But in those days, I thought that was interesting that the most different president, so to say, or the most different agenda for president, one should say, the focal agenda compared to Trump is Eisenhower. So.
Yeah, really interesting. And like I said, well, it triggered quite some conversations, in class and beyond. Okay, questions and comments?
I have another question if nobody else. Oh, Joanna.
Joanna, please, yes. Shoot.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tobias. This is very interesting. I wonder if you could sort of give your thoughts on the distinction between predictive and descriptive approaches to the use of AI, and whether you think there's a kind of slippage that happens, like when you're talking about analysis of even something like Google Books, and then it becomes trends, and then there starts to be a kind of forward trajectory, right? So you start with descriptive analytics, and then it suddenly becomes predictive in this funny way. And I wonder, I just wonder what your thoughts are on the relationship between those two. Are they the same? Are they different? Are there different ethical issues that happen? Because we know there's ethics already in the descriptive analytics, right? I mean, everything you're talking about is the way those models, kind of embed certain assumptions and then work. But I don't know. It's not a well-formulated question, but there's something about that relationship between descriptive and predictive that I'd love to hear you just muse on a bit.
Yeah, no, that is a very good question, of course. So, and I think that so there is, I think, a fairly kind of workflowy, is that a word? Workflowy answer. So basically, that where you say that descriptive analytics is, in a way, the process you do before you go to predictive analytics to find out things that you might want to find out in the data that is interesting. However, I think that's not good, because that somehow sounds like descriptive analytics is less than predictive analytics. I think what prediction is why I use prediction is simply in this kind of very descriptive sense that some kind of input variable is mapped onto an output variable B by the computer. While the descriptive, and I think, Johanna, if I remember your work then correctly, but the ethical issues, for instance, descriptive analytics, that's often done with visualizations, of course. So, and there's whole kinds of complicated questions around whether visualizations are good representations and what they might actually show and what might they not show, right? So there's a whole, and sometimes, I mean, we all know the wonderful network diagrams, for instance, a good example, they can sometimes generate closeness where there is less closeness than people think, so there's a certain way of doing this. The same applies to predictive analytics. How I use this is not in the kind of sense of So we have this paper on predictive policing too, where we analyze the kind of very problematic cases of predictive policing on the ethics side. For me, this is mainly a kind of a way of doing supervised learning with machines, so that is basically what the humanities approach is. And then in terms of, if I understood your question correctly, the ethical issues in predictive analytics is that you can, that's at least sort of my experience, my pure experience now, and I haven't really thought about this in a very detailed way yet. You can match almost anything to anything nowadays. So that is the problem with kind of complex algorithmic structures such as neural networks. So there's, of course, for instance, this infamous paper, I think, from Stanford, where they looked at facial, all the facial recognition kind of rediscovery of facial expressions that basically tell you about whatever your interest, either in men or women or whatever. And they suspiciously never actually tell you, for instance, how complex the network is in between that they developed. So I would claim that as long as they don't do that, I don't believe anything of their work, because actually, as long as you make the network big enough, the neural network big enough, you really can match anything to anything else. So that is what my experience in that world is. Does that answer your question?
It's just interesting to hear you think about these things. So thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Sally?
Let's try putting my microphone on again. When I was reading, so going back to your presentation, Tobias, and in the big bits about algorithmic control, algorithmic criticism, and then you mentioned data control, and it was interesting to see to listen to what you just said, that you're not particularly into authority and all this kind of thing. And I questioned the word control when it came to data. And going back to what you said at the beginning, this idea of data citizenship, and I wanted to connect that to data literacy, and this idea that data is ubiquitous now, I think, and the importance of becoming, and I like this term that you mentioned, data citizenship. So I was wanting to move beyond data control to a different word, so I came up with literacy because I couldn't think of a better word. But I love this idea of data citizenship, and I remember there was some research done by Mark, what's his name, from King's College, yes, who was looking at how data is leaked from apps without us knowing about it. So I just wondered if you could say why you chose the word control in your presentation, and what would that move towards data literacy, data citizenship, to make it more that we are more empowered within this data ecosystem, something like this.
Yeah, another brilliant question. Thank you very much, Sally. I have to admit that the control is more like a behind this. So I think that's what people sometimes call it. So it's a question who has control over data. Our data mainly. So, and you know that Mark and we have this project together called Our Data Ourselves, that I think Mark presented at some point, from what I remember, which was about figuring out how when teenagers use mobile phones, what kind of datafication processes they're exposed to. And what is nice about the project is that it turns around this kind of idea from, I think, reality mining, so where you have this idea that you use digital devices to find out the truth about the truth, so about our social lives, and you turn this into a critical instrument in the sense that you basically tell people how they are reality mined, so because we all reality mine. So I forgot now, the latest research is that mobile phones are, of course, very popular because they have this location information that makes you very predictable, at least in this world. And so that is the background of data control. So who has control? So it's kind of a very trivial word. I like the word data citizen, to say, and you're right that Mark came up with that term, I think, from what I remember. And the idea here is, again, we go beyond a kind of legal point of view, where we have somehow the rights to our data, and as long as we are informed what is going on the processes of us. We click on this kind of, in Europe, we click on the famous cookie annoyance. That's all fine, right? And I think what is important here is that you not just have the right, but also the means and the power to do something about our data. And that is then a whole bigger question that then comes back to your question around data literacy, but also about platform politics and these kind of things. So that is basically why I think data citizens should be defended as an idea. So in the sense of not just having a legal right to something, but also the means and the abilities to do it.
That's fantastic, and that moves that beyond. Of course, humanists like to critique the words used, so that's it's nice to move beyond that. And maybe I can sort of throw that back into the discussion, because there is a lot about these track and tracing of people during COVID, and the UK is quite an interesting example because it's not working. And I just wondered how this fits into this debate. So this is a sort of wider question, but this monitoring of people, of what did you call it, reality mining in the COVID times, it's not really, I get the impression it's not really working, which is an interesting
the
discussion.
Thing is, all these technologies don't work, the way that, so if you listen to whatever, Elon Musk, then tomorrow there will be a self-driving car and the computers will have taken over the world. But he also tells us this, of course, because he thinks he wants to advertise how wonderful his technologies are. Yeah, so they don't work in a way. So if you look at GPT-3 as a latest example, it's all very exciting, but at the end of the day, the stories GPT-3 tells us are quite boring, right? There's no change in them, so that's very hard for it. They're grammatically correct, let's put it like this, right? So, and that's impressive enough. But it's also, of course, that's an easy excuse or easy way out for us to just say they don't work, because they do work in a particular way. Yeah, and we need to understand much more how they work in a particular context and what their use cases beyond the ideology of artificial intelligence. And then actually you end up with much more down-to-earth kind of day-to-day decisions on people that are made by these systems, right? Rather than this kind of grand-scale Terminator idea. Terminator take over the world idea.
Great, yes.
Right. Well, in terms of control, we have this concept of, society of control, and there are authors like, Seb Franklin and others that, articulated the argument that we live in a society of control, and control comes with a medium, with the digital medium. And that's why it's ubiquitous. Joanna, yes, please. Yes, Joanna?
No, it wasn't me. I don't think.
Oh,
sorry.
You raised the hand.
Well, since I'm here, I don't mind asking then another question based on what you were just saying, Tobias.
We're so happy you're here. We're so happy.
Well, I'm glad to be here. But the relationship between system and context. I mean, I'm curious about what that means in the actual implementation of an AI system, because one designs the system, but what is the context in that sense? Where is that designed into the implementation?
Sorry. Yeah, so context is a big context. So, but I think to say what the general problems of AI systems currently is, of course, that they don't have a lot of context.
Right.
So that is, they are mainly made for one particular single use case. So the challenge is often that they are far away from what we would consider to be a general AI, in the sense that they would be able to actually change their context.
Right.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, no, I'm just interested in sort of the codependence between system and context as a, if we think about the organic world, any system that runs in an environmental or ecological, sort of context is completely context codependent, right? Yeah. There's a continual dynamic transformation of the system in relationship to the environmental conditions. Yeah. And I'm just wondering if there's anything similar within the AI design world, if there's a kind of way that process, I mean, I'm not asking for it because it goes right to sci-fi and disasters and catastrophes and so forth, but I'm just wondering.
No, I think there definitely is to say. I mean, there's a lot of people now want to move to whatever lifelong learning for algorithms or something.
Right.
So, but I'm really interested in what actually is already working. Yeah. So, when I can say that with fairly kind of about 90% of all kind of AI use cases are very context-free, if I may say that to say. So there's not a lot of learning going on there in that sense around context. But I think we will see that, of course, because the system also, once they run for a couple of years, they might also learn new context. So it's interesting. I've never thought about it. Thank you.
Yeah, they'll get old and cranky.
Yeah.
What is the attitude of a geriatric algorithm?
It's a good question, actually. It's interesting. That's going to be the title of my next paper. Old and cranky algorithm.
Chris knows I'm hopeless on these topics.
No. Quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. Yes. Well, context is like in terms of like, I know exactly that Joanna knows very well. Context is, and as far as I'm concerned, the work that I do is of crucial importance. Computational poetry cannot be there without context, and I think that in poetry, particularly in the medium, in the digital medium, text is always context. Yeah, but yes, thanks so much, Joanna. Alors, des questions en français?
Can I also say, because there are some students, there's never a bad question, if I may say that. So it's always good to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes, please. I can be their mouthpiece, and I can like.
That's okay.
I can tell on them.
Yeah.
And let you know that, for instance, indeed, you already actually mentioned this, but indeed, we all loved the concept of data citizen and critical citizenship, and the examples that they gave about fake news, right? That research in which turned out that the content was basically not as important as the network of websites and venues where the fake news, right, were broadcast, and the hackathons, and so we so much loved that, and that there is palpable work in that direction, that we could not help ourselves asking at the same time, well, this is all brilliant and it looks already effective, but how about and echoing here Sally a little bit, how about us, humanists, laymen, who don't have the opportunity to look into trackers, we don't have the skills, we're not equipped yet, or we don't have the opportunity to participate in a hackathon like the one that Tobias did, and what are the things that we can do to be data citizens, to be critical of that, as common people, so to speak. Yeah, as laymen.
So I mean, most of the humanities people I met actually can do much more than sometimes admit to. So I should say that at the beginning. So I'm pretty confident that this is actually nowadays not such a big challenge anymore, so to say. So and one of the most rewarding experiences in teaching the humanities is that you actually see a very quick development nowadays. So you can actually see people who have particular student groups who often perceived as not being very representative in hardcore computing degrees. They come to our courses and you see that the distinction is not there anymore. So I think I should always say this at the beginning. Let me tell you, however, another story to say. So, and now I have to admit, because I give quite a few talks, I'm not sure whether this was in this talk too. So if I repeat this, we did some work with refugee apps. So, you know, there was, of course, the so-called European refugee crisis in 2015-16 in Europe. And one of the distinguished features that we all, so say, were amazed by was that these refugees use smartphones to communicate and navigate their way through Europe. And that was the same time we had finished with the earlier work that we've done. Have I mentioned this in the talk? Or
no, you haven't.
Good.
You
then
haven't.
that's good. Excellent. So, so we developed a new system because we were interested to invite. So what then? I'll get a bit distracted. That the NGOs like whatever, Doctors Without Borders, UNHCR, and there was even something called TechFugees. You know, they developed a lot of community apps to help these refugees. Yeah.
Yes.
And we thought we use our experience in this kind of breaking into phones, in this kind of to organize, analyze with these organizations together what's going on the level of their phones. And our real aim was actually to package it and organize it in such a way. These are hacker tools, right? So they're, I mean, hacker tools. I mean, hacker in the good sense. They're basically decompiling and doing all kinds of things that a normal person will never have to do in their life. What is a common person? You just called it, right? So, we then developed a different system called Droid Destruction Kit, which basically allows anybody to hack into their phone. And the really rewarding experience was actually that we then invited these NGOs over to workshops. And guess what? The first app we looked at actually leaked at any moment in time the clear text location information of its user to a central server in Berlin. Very good if you want to surveil the refugees, not so good if you want to protect them. But I also have to say that that is, so to say, typical research in this field, and is also not very satisfying, because unless you have a kind of very conspiratorial worldview and you think that refugee organizations just want to survey refugees, you will think that's just a technical fault. Correct, it was just a technical fault, it was removed next time. So we actually wrote a whole new approach into this, where we think that the relevant bit is actually to make these technologies together and have this experience together in these workshops so that everybody can do it, right? And then to say in these workshops, if you ever sat there, there's also different skill sets required. No, it's not just to say somebody who's able to run these tools. And then the other point that we make actually that is it's more important to actually understand the everyday workings of these practices, right? So not just the bye, Paul, not just the exceptional cases of where you find out where a tool leaks information. And we then did a whole kind of analysis of, for instance, how large-scale platforms such as Google and Facebook on the micro level of tools actually dominate even kind of humanitarian apps. So my answer to all this is we could even invite NGOs, okay? And we sat together with these NGOs who have other problems in life. And it was also for me, as somebody who's a computer person, a great experience, because they actually pointed me to lots of points. You know, I didn't actually realize. When I look at code, I see Apple and Google appearing all the time in this code. And I just know this because there are some libraries that you have to use to connect to some other things. But these humanitarian actors, they didn't know that, right? They thought they had developed an app, and they didn't know how dependent that app was on Apple and Google. And they basically made us stop at that moment when we looked through this code where this dependency came about. So I think this is not a distinction between normal or common people and other people, but it's just a question of collaboration and sitting together.
Thank you. That's a really encouraging answer. Yes, and the examples are brilliant. Yes, they are brilliant. Yes. Okay. Other questions? Anybody else? Well, if not, it's been almost an hour.
I have one more question.
Oh, good, fantastic. Oh, Margarita, yes, please.
Okay, I have to unmute myself. Je peux poser ma question en français?
Oui, oui.
Si vous... Ok. J'ai particulièrement apprécié la partie où vous disiez que l'intelligence artificielle peut permettre de étudier ou donner de la place à des groupes ou des sujets qui ne sont pas toujours représentés dans les études traditionnelles. Mais ce qui me tracasse un peu, c'est que d'autre part, j'ai l'impression que le passage au numérique risque aussi de perdre énormément de domaines d'études qui ne sont pas spécialement adaptés, disons, à ce passage, parce que, par exemple, je pense pour les langues anciennes, le corpus n'est pas très ample, ou la langue ne s'adapte pas bien aux méthodes appliquées à l'anglais, etc. Je voulais savoir qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ça et qu'est-ce que c'est possible de faire pour éviter que ce genre de perte se vérifie.
Okay.
That was too complicated for me. So.
Okay.
No, it's fine. I think I'm sure that. Thank you so much, Margarita. So, but I need a translation. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, Margarita was kind enough to also drop me this question by email in English. So I can simply read the message I got from her, or just do a quick translation. In your talk, you said that now that AI is around and is effective, we have the opportunity to look into subjects that are not that haven't been so often looked into traditionally. But Margarita, particularly given her background, and by the way, her position is AI and DA as well. So there's two of you. In this meeting with this incredible combination. Given the work that she does, she's concerned about subjects or kinds types of data that, because they're not that easily tractable by AI, will fall into obsolescence, negligence. They will be like they'll fall behind, and people will forget work lasts on them, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I can only say yes to that. That's a danger to say, but I also don't have a better solution to this than somehow trying. I mean, that's, I guess, an academic piece of work to say that this shouldn't be the case. So I think we should definitely not. I give you an example to say. I mean, this has little to do with AI, but I also have this Holocaust project called the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure, where we try to integrate Holocaust material across Europe. And the first thing I learned in my naivety about computing methods is that though there's a lot of digital material in Holocaust, that actually historians are interested in not looking at the 10th times at the same digital available document, but actually finding out about secret archives somewhere in the Ukraine that no other historian has ever looked at. And that should be what we are trying to aim. So the whole project is therefore organized not just in trying to make use of digital material, but also actually enable this other type of research. Whenever we are confronted with, say, demands towards us to make projects, I think we should always make that point, if you see what I mean. So it should be not just about the 10th art historical computational analysis of the Mona Lisa, because it happens to be pictured I don't know how many times in life, but it should always be about the secret hidden archives. And that's really what historical research is about, if you ask me. Does that answer your question, Margarita? Or?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
And
I'm sorry for. Yes, I hope so. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions or comments or praises to Tobias? Okay. Harsh criticism then? Okay. Well, if not, we'll call this a day. Thank you so much again, Tobias, for your generosity, for doing a talk and then taking this pretty longish Q&A. Thank you for all the insightful answers today, and like I said, info and tips and tricks in your talk. We're very generous, and we're so looking forward to hopefully as soon as possible have you over on campus to give an in-person conference, to give an in-person lecture. And until then, thank you so much again. if there's anything else you'd like to add,
I'm super happy. Thank you so much for inviting me, and
yes.
Let's just hope this all will be over too. We have to go through the winter, and then I'm sure we can all hug each other again.
Yes,
have more than one beer, right? So
yes, exactly.
Good.
Okay, thank you so much again, Tobias. Well, our next event in December, December 9th, is going to be, we're going to feature Øyvind Ende, who is chair of European Association of Digital Humanities. We're going to follow the same format, recorded talk, and then Q&A on December 9th in the afternoon. If you're interested, and I hope you are, and I think you should be, please follow the announcements on the same website, the Altissia Chair in Digital Cultures and Ethics website. Thanks so much again, Tobias, for this fantastic contribution to our lecture series. We'll be in touch, and like I said, looking forward to inviting you over to our campus. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. And say hello to Irene for me. So it's,
yes, I will.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye now. Thank you.
Monsieur, vous êtes encore là?
On est parti.